Hello, I'm the Daily Storyteller, and I'm here to keep you company today. If you've visited my channel before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, I'm so glad to welcome you to the world of stories. I know many of you use these videos to relax or to help fall asleep more easily. So get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the gentle sound of rain in the background to wash away your stress and worries. In this video, you'll hear chilling stories, most of them based on true events, told with honesty and depth. If you enjoy this content, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now then, let's begin. It was one of those nights where everything felt just right. Two teenage boys free from parental supervision, the house theirs to command, and the thrill of endless possibilities hanging thick in the air. I was 14, David was 15, and his parents had left town for the weekend, handing us the keys to freedom and chaos. From the moment I stepped into David's house that Friday night, the energy was electric. The basement den, half above ground thanks to a sloping hill in the front yard, was already set up with all our favorite things: a massive TV, controllers piled high, and snacks enough to last a small army. Video games buzzed and flickered, music pulsed through the speakers, and laughter filled every corner. Junk food wrappers littered the floor, sodas spilled precariously close to keyboards, and the clock barely registered the passage of time. We played hard, screaming at the screen, challenging each other to impossible feats, and daring the other to keep up. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the night deepening beyond the window's reach. Around 4 a.m., the adrenaline faded and a calm silence crept in. David suggested a quick walk around the neighborhood to cool off before crashing. The chill of the early morning air was a shock to our overheated skin, and the quiet streets felt strangely peaceful. Returning inside, we headed down to the lower half of the basement, a room outfitted with couches and another TV, the place we planned to sleep. David threw me a blanket and started a movie, but exhaustion overtook me almost immediately. I curled up on the couch nearest the basement stairs, ready to fall into a deep, welcome sleep. Then it happened. I was jerked awake by a shaking shoulder, David's face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Listen," he whispered urgently. Still groggy, I struggled to focus, but faint sounds seeped through the silence. The unmistakable creak of a drawer opening upstairs, soft footsteps pressing against the floorboards. My heart hammered. This wasn't normal. I tried to convince myself it was the cats. They did roam the house, but David's fear was genuine. Two sharp coughs echoed from above, snapping our fight-or-flight instincts to full alert. Then, steady footsteps approached the basement stairs. Panic ignited within me. I scrambled to grab my phone from the floor while David killed the TV. We crept silently, desperate to avoid detection, toward the den's exit door across the basement. Passing the staircase without daring to look back, we burst outside, sprinting through the neighbor's bushes as quietly as we could. David's trembling fingers dialed 911 as I kept watch on the house's front windows. Under the scant moonlight, a shadowy figure moved across the living room, tall and imposing. We whispered our situation to the dispatcher, each second stretching impossibly long as sirens finally pierced the night. Police cars roared into the cul-de-sac, sliding to a stop before the house. Officers rushed in, flashlights sweeping through the darkness, while one searched the yard and woods behind the property. Another stayed with us, asking the necessary questions. Did we see the intruder? Was anything missing? 5 minutes later, a shout cut through the night. Footsteps pounded into the nearby woods, and officers gave chase. The man tried to escape, but was quickly caught and handcuffed. The intruder was huge, towering over 6 feet, 300 pounds of muscle, yet despite the terrifying intrusion, he had taken nothing. His motives remained a mystery that haunted us long after the police left. Sleep that night was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind turned into threats in our hyper-alert minds. We took turns watching the house, unwilling to let our guard down. The basement, once a place of laughter and friendship, had become a shadowed battleground, a reminder that safety could shatter in an instant. The sun had barely risen when the adrenaline finally started to ebb, leaving in its place a thick fog of exhaustion and unease. David and I sat silently on the couch in the now quiet basement, the echoes of the night still ringing loud in our minds. It was hard to imagine that only hours ago laughter had filled this room, and now the same space held shadows far darker than any video game level. David's parents came home later that day, their faces etched with concern once we told them what had happened. Their usual calm demeanor cracked, revealing the worry we had been too frightened to show. The police report had been filed, statements given, and neighbors alerted. But even with law enforcement involved, the sense of security we had taken for granted was shattered. In the days that followed, the house seemed to breathe differently. Creaks and groans that were once just part of its personality now sounded ominous. Every time the wind rattled a window or a floorboard shifted, my heart leapt into my throat. David and I developed a habit of checking every lock multiple times before sleep, our youthful bravado replaced by a wary vigilance. Sleepovers became a thing of the past. David's basement, once our sanctuary, was off limits after dark. We took to hanging out upstairs, leaving the doors locked and the lights on, the glow of our phones the only comfort in the oppressive quiet. What had been a fun night of games and jokes had transformed into a brutal lesson in vulnerability. For the first time, we understood how fragile the illusion of safety could be, how quickly a home could feel like a prison. Despite the fear, something unexpected emerged from that night, a bond forged in shared terror. David and I, once just friends, became brothers in arms. We learned to trust in each other's presence as a shield against the unknown. Months later, the man who broke in was convicted for trespassing and breaking and entering. The court documents revealed no clear motive, no stolen goods, no personal vendetta, just a shadow passing through someone else's life, leaving scars invisible but deeply felt. Looking back, I realized that night was more than just a frightening experience. It was a rite of passage, a dark chapter that marked the end of innocence and the beginning of a deeper awareness. Even now, years later, the memory lingers. I can still see the silhouette framed in the window, feel the pounding of my heart as we fled through the bushes, hear the distant sirens slicing through the night. That night changed me. It taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the strength to face it, that safety is precious but never guaranteed, and that sometimes the darkest monsters are the ones we never see coming. It was a quiet evening in a small town that felt safe enough for a lone 18-year-old girl to walk around without worry. The streets were empty, the air crisp and calm, and the comforting hum of distant life whispered in the background. I was that girl, petite, independent, and used to the peaceful rhythm of my town. The night had started with a simple need: water. As I strolled down the block, earbuds in, music playing softly, I realized I was thirsty. Just around the corner was a little store, usually open late, and I thought I'd quickly grab a bottle. But tonight, something felt off. The store was closed. No lights, no sign of the owner. I called out, hoping someone might still be inside, maybe caught up in something unexpected. No answer. Strange, since the store usually stayed open until midnight. I called again, louder this time. Still silence. Turning to walk away, a faint sound made me freeze. The creak of a door opening. Hope flickered as the porch light came on, and a figure appeared in the doorway. At first, relief washed over me. The owner was here after all. But that relief quickly turned into unease. The man's eyes were wild, unfocused, and his grip tightened on a shiny knife in his hand. He cleared his throat nervously and muttered something about being busy in the kitchen. The excuse felt hollow, and though I handed him money for the water, every instinct screamed at me to be cautious. When he returned with the bottle, the knife still in his grasp, I tried to shrug off the fear that was knotting my stomach. I hurried away, music louder now, trying to drown out the growing anxiety, but I wasn't alone. A few minutes into my walk home, I sensed eyes watching me from the shadows. I spun around. No one. Heart pounding, I quickened my pace to a jog. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I glanced back, and there he was, only 10 feet away. The knife gleamed under the streetlights, his wild eyes locked onto me. Fear surged like a tidal wave. I ran, faster than I ever had before. Behind me, I heard a heavy crash. The man had tripped. Relief mingled with panic as I didn't dare look back again until I was safely inside my house, locked and trembling. The police came, and days later, news broke that the man had been arrested. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a criminal tangled in dark dealings involving human organs and trafficking. Freezers filled with horrifying evidence were found in his possession. That night, the town's quiet facade shattered for me, and I learned that even the safest places can hide terrifying secrets. Days after that terrifying night, the news continued to haunt me. The man I barely escaped from wasn't just some random troublemaker. He was a predator, tangled in dark, unspeakable crimes. The police revealed chilling details. He was involved in human trafficking, selling harvested organs from his victims. Freezers filled with gruesome evidence had been found in his home, and his arrest sent ripples of shock through our small community. It was surreal to think that the quiet little store around the block had been a front for such horror. And I had come face to face with that darkness, unknowingly stepping into a nightmare that could have ended so much worse. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to shake the shadow that the encounter cast over me. Every familiar street corner felt different, every late-night walk tinged with suspicion. The sense of safety I had always taken for granted was gone, yet life had to go on. I refused to be imprisoned by fear. Friends and family tried to comfort me, but I knew the true healing would come only with time, and with reclaiming my world. I started to take different routes, avoiding the block where the store stood. The little lights that once blinked invitingly now seemed like watchful eyes. The sound of footsteps behind me quickened my heartbeat even on broad daylight, and the image of that wild-eyed man clutching his knife stayed burned into my memory. One night I took my dog out for a walk. The streets were quiet, the cool air sharp with the scent of pine and earth. A black cat appeared from the shadows, following us at a distance. It wasn't the usual stray. Something about its steady, unblinking gaze unsettled me deeply. The cat stalked us for several blocks, disappearing only after we reached home. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cat was more than an animal, a symbol, perhaps, of the lurking danger I'd escaped. It was as if death itself had taken a familiar form to remind me of what could have been. Gradually, the town began to heal from the shock of the arrest, but the scars remained invisible, yet deep. The store was boarded up, a silent monument to the horrors hidden behind its shuttered doors. For me, that encounter marked a turning point, a brutal reminder that evil can wear many masks, and sometimes it's closer than we think. I grew stronger from it, more cautious, but also more grateful. The freedom to walk safely at night was something I now cherished above all. Sometimes when the night is still and the wind whispers through the trees, I remember that night, the frozen fear, the desperate run, the distant sirens, and I am thankful to be alive. Growing up, the mountains behind my house were more than just a backdrop to everyday life. They were a sanctuary, a playground, a place where the world seemed vast and full of possibility. I loved taking long hikes with my dogs, Buddy and Snoopy, letting them run free through the open desert terrain. The freedom of those wide spaces was something I cherished, a balm for a restless soul. But one winter morning, something changed. The weather had been harsh the day before, blinding snowstorms and winds strong enough to push trucks off the roads. Yet, by the next morning, the skies cleared and the air was crisp and biting, carrying the sharp scent of frost and pine. Despite the cold, I convinced my dad and aunt to join me for a hike up Mountain B, the steeper, rockier peak just a short distance from our usual route on Mountain A. The trail was treacherous. I remember the crunch of snow under our boots, the sting of icy gusts on my face, and the slippery rocks we carefully stepped over. Tire tracks, odd and out of place, marked the snowy path as if someone had driven a vehicle up there just days ago. It seemed strange, but we shrugged it off, eager for the adventure and the view awaiting us. At the summit, the scene was both breathtaking and unsettling. The town stretched below like a miniature model, lights twinkling faintly in the early light. Yet scattered all around were reminders of human carelessness, beer bottles smashed against the rocks, food wrappers fluttering like wounded birds in the cold wind, and dead bushes stripped bare by careless feet. My dogs, ever curious, sniffed around a withered bush. I called them back, but they ignored me, focused on something hidden beneath the snow-dusted branches. As I approached, I noticed strange, burnt pieces of cardboard scattered on the ground and clinging to the branches, blackened fragments like ash remnants from a fire. Picking one up, I was startled to realize it wasn't just any scrap. It was a fragment of an old, faded photograph. The image was monochrome, grainy, and worn by time, but an eye stared back at me, vivid and piercing. It felt hauntingly familiar, like a memory from a dream or a face etched in my mind. I showed it to my dad and aunt. They shared my unease, but dismissed it as some prank or lost trash. Still, a pull inside me insisted we gather the fragments. We spent the next half hour scavenging the area, matching torn pieces like a macabre puzzle. Slowly, a larger picture began to emerge, an 18 by 20-inch portrait, mostly complete, yet marked by time and damage. When we assembled the last pieces and stepped back, the horror of the image sank deep into my chest. It was a photo of my grandfather, a man I barely remembered, but whose presence loomed large in our family history. He had been tragically murdered in front of his California home by gang members when my mother was a child. The killers had also targeted my mother's older brothers, forcing our family to flee across states to seek safety in Nevada. Seeing his face, defaced and discarded on that mountain, was like a cruel message, one that raised more questions than answers. Why had this photograph ended up here, miles from our home? Who had brought it up the mountain, and why had they tried to destroy it? The weight of the photograph in my hands was heavier than its physical form. It was a burden of memories, pain, and unanswered questions. My mother's face mirrored my own confusion and fear when I showed her the assembled photo. This was supposed to be a sacred image, a treasured keepsake carefully guarded in her room. Yet here it was, torn and burnt on a remote mountain. She told me the story of our family's painful past, how my grandfather had been brutally killed by gang members in California, forcing my mother's family to escape and rebuild their lives far away in Nevada. The killers had continued to haunt our family, their shadows stretching across years and miles. But what chilled us the most was what my grandmother confessed next. She revealed that just the night before we found the photo, she had instructed one of my uncles to take that very photograph and destroy it. She spoke of a strange presence she felt whenever the photo was near, eyes that seemed to follow her, an eerie feeling of being watched no matter where she stood in the room. The night my uncle set out to dispose of the photograph was a brutal one. Battling darkness and cold, he and his brother had driven up the mountain under the cloak of night. The wind howled, snow whipped fiercely around them, but their determination was unwavering. Burning the photo proved futile. The wind extinguished the flames quickly, forcing them to rip it apart by hand and scatter the pieces across the snowy ground. Yet somehow, the photo remained whole in spirit. When we found the fragments, they were all close together, untouched by snow or wind, as if the mountain itself refused to let the image be lost. That discovery unsettled me deeply. It was as if the photograph wanted to stay with our family, to carry its story despite attempts to silence it. In the weeks that followed, the eerie feeling lingered. I no longer felt the mountain was just a place of beauty and freedom. Instead, it was a silent witness to our family's unresolved pain and the dark forces that had once tried to tear us apart. We never found out who had brought the photograph up the mountain or why. But that mystery, that haunting presence, became a reminder of the past's grip and the strength needed to face it. Every hike since then has been tinged with a mix of reverence and caution. A walk between memory and mystery, where the past and present quietly intertwine. Our family home was always more than just bricks and mortar. It was a living, breathing entity filled with memories, laughter, and, as I would later learn, shadows that clung to its walls. I grew up there with my younger brother G and our parents. The house was long and narrow, stretching about 30 feet wide and nearly 200 feet deep. Surrounded by tall walls and nestled above street level, it was a fortress of sorts. Yet, inside, an invisible presence lingered. When I was 9 and G was just 2, my father was working abroad for a year. At home, it was just Mum, G, and me. Nights were spent huddled together in Mom's room. She was terrified of sleeping alone, a self-proclaimed scaredy cat. The television was always on, its flickering light a comfort against the dark, against the unknown. One particular night stands out vividly in my memory. We had planned a cozy movie night. But just as we were settling in, craving the familiar taste of potato chips and Doritos, Mom and I dashed to the kitchen to grab snacks. We left G lying on the bed, giggling softly to himself. When we returned, the scene was strange. G was still where we left him, but the bed covers were not. They were undone and folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The sight was baffling, yet we brushed it off, convincing ourselves we hadn't noticed the change. We double-checked the room, under the bed, inside the closet, but found nothing unusual. Locked the door, turned on the TV, and tried to settle down. But something had shifted in the air, a subtle tension that we couldn't explain. Fast forward 4 years. Dad had returned, and the family was whole again. One morning, as we prepared to leave for an amusement park, a loud banging and screeching erupted near the kitchen. We rushed to investigate, only to find the washing machine violently shaking and dragging itself across the floor. It was as if it had a life of its own. Dad laughed nervously, blaming a timer glitch. But the laughter died quickly when the machine restarted without power, shaking uncontrollably. Only when Mum unplugged it did the chaos cease. That was no ordinary malfunction. Over the years, strange occurrences became a part of life in that house. Voices calling my name when no one was there, the sensation of eyes watching me in the darkened hallways, shadows flickering just out of sight. One chilling morning, when I was 13, I heard someone fiddling with the padlock on our gate. Expecting Mom's return from the supermarket, I opened the door, but found my brother and mother locked outside on opposite sides of the gate. The realization that someone else might be in the house sent a cold shiver down my spine. The feeling of not being alone, the creeping darkness that seemed to swallow the light near the end of the hallway, these sensations were constant. And though I never saw it clearly, I always imagined a woman with long black hair, dressed in white, staring back at me from the shadows. That image of the woman, long black hair, flowing white dress, became almost like a shadowy guardian, or perhaps a restless spirit haunting the edges of my vision. I never understood why I pictured her that way. Maybe it was a reflection of some old movie or story I'd seen as a child, but every time I looked down that hallway, especially in the dark, I could feel her eyes fixed on me. The nights were the hardest. Every creak, every whisper of wind through the old house became a cause for alarm. I wasn't the only one to sense it. My mother, too, would sometimes pause mid-sentence, eyes wide and searching the darkness. My brother, young as he was, often spoke about seeing shadows darting around corners or hearing soft footsteps when no one else was there. One night, when I was around 26 and living in a different country, the presence came to me in a dream, or something like it. I was back in that old house, in a room that wasn't mine, but somehow familiar. The TV was the only light source, its glow casting long shadows. I was drowsy, unable to move, caught in the terrible grip of sleep paralysis. Then she appeared. The woman, black hair veiling her face, white nightgown flowing, her hollow eyes fixed on me and my sleeping parents beside me. A cold rage emanated from her, an anger directed not at me, but at them. I felt paralyzed with fear, unable to speak or move, until something inside me broke free. A fierce, roaring anger surged through me. I pushed past my paralysis, charged at her, and as we collided, the rage drained away, leaving only an endless loneliness. I ran down the corridor, opened a door, and woke up. The TV off, daylight spilling through curtains. The experience stayed with me, haunting and vivid. But the strangest moment came years earlier, when I was just a child. I woke up early one morning to find a shadow darker than any darkness lurking in the doorway. It wasn't a person, but a writhing mass of tendrils and jagged edges, flat yet moving in impossible ways. It had no mouth, No eyes, just holes pretending to be features, and a twisted grin that chilled me to the bone. I was frozen, unable to move as it lurched closer, moving upright despite its flat, shadowy form. It seemed to revel in my fear, the silence growing thick and suffocating. I covered my head with the blanket, the only shield I could muster against the nightmare. The minutes stretched on in terror, but eventually the shadow faded, leaving the ordinary room behind. I spent days checking every corner, every shadow, half expecting it to return. No one else ever saw it. Maybe it was my mind's way of coping, or something far darker. I never wanted to find out. Through all these experiences, one thing remained clear. Our home was never truly empty. It held memories, grief, anger, and perhaps something else. Something that watched, waited, and whispered in the darkness. Sleep paralysis had been a ghost that haunted me on and off since I was a teenager. It was that terrible moment when your mind wakes up, but your body remains trapped in a paralyzed state, helpless, vulnerable, and often visited by shadows that seem too real to dismiss as mere dreams. One night, exhausted and restless, I lay in bed with the TV softly playing a cooking show, the gentle hum a lullaby for a restless soul. As the sleep timer ticked down, I felt myself slipping away into darkness, but then a chill crawled up my spine, pulling me back. I was awake, yet frozen. And there she was. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, standing at the foot of my bed. She wore a white nightgown, clean and old-fashioned, her hollow black eyes staring without blinking. Her arms hung loosely by her sides, and in her right hand she held a small teddy bear. There was no warmth in her presence, no comfort in the childlike figure. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching, an eerie sentinel in the dark. I tried desperately to move, to scream, to do anything, but my body was locked in place. The terror was suffocating, yet somehow I managed to summon the strength to will myself awake. With a gasp, I broke free from the paralysis and sat upright, the image of the girl lingering in my mind long after I turned on the light. For days afterward, the memory haunted me. The black-eyed girl with the teddy bear wasn't just a figment of sleep paralysis. She was a symbol, a dark presence that seemed to seep into my waking life. And then the black cat appeared. It started on my nightly walks with my aging dog. The cat would show up out of nowhere, always in the shadows, always watching. It was just a cat, yet something about its steady, unblinking gaze unsettled me deeply. It followed us silently, never approaching, but never leaving either. I began to fear the cat as a harbinger of death, an omen lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. The nights grew colder and the episodes more frequent. One evening, a few weeks after the terrifying paralysis, I was jolted awake by what sounded like my doorbell ringing in the dead of night, around 2:45 a.m. My heart pounded and fear wrapped around me like a vice. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. Checking the front door and windows revealed no one. Had I dreamed it? Or was someone out there lurking just beyond my sight? The next days only deepened my unease. Teddy bears began to appear everywhere, on the road, in public bathrooms, even on stickers in unlikely places. Each one seemed to mock the innocence they represented, twisted into sinister reminders. Then, one night, after another eerie doorbell chime, I opened the front door and found a giant, tattered teddy bear sitting on my porch. Its beady eyes stared ahead, its fur matted and stained. A red bow tied around its neck gave it a grotesque formality. I slammed the door shut, heart racing, unsure whether to call the police or dismiss it as a prank. The giant teddy bear sat on my porch like a silent sentinel of fear. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Its fur was grimy and worn, with patches of stuffing spilling out as if it had been dragged through hell and back. That red bow around its neck somehow made it more unsettling, like a twisted gift from an unknown tormentor. I called my husband, voice trembling, and he assured me he had nothing to do with it. No one I knew had any reason or guts to leave something so creepy on my doorstep. I was left alone with the bear and my spiraling thoughts. I debated calling the police. But what would I say? Someone left a giant teddy bear on my porch, and I'm scared. It sounded ridiculous. So I waited it out, nervously peeking through the curtains until dawn finally broke. That morning, gathering courage, I put on gloves and carried the bear to the dumpster, hoping to bury the nightmare in garbage and forget it forever. Yet the unease lingered, thick and stubborn. Weeks passed, and the strange phenomena didn't end. I kept seeing the black-eyed girl in my dreams, felt the presence of the silent watcher during nighttime walks, and the cat, always the cat, seemed to shadow me like a grim reminder. Then, one chilly December evening, while loading groceries into my car, a man approached. His rough clothes, messy hair, and deep, piercing blue eyes sent a shiver down my spine. Though I was fiercely independent and reluctant to accept help, he insisted on opening my car's back door for me. His smile was unsettling. When he handed me a tiny Christmas teddy bear, complete with a Santa hat, I froze. Was he the one behind the giant bear on my porch? Was he following me? Or was my mind unraveling, twisting reality into paranoia? I declined the gift and hurried into my car, watching him in my rear-view mirror. His expression had darkened, anger flashing briefly before I pulled away. That night marked the peak of my paranoia. I locked every door, installed extra security, and tried to convince myself the fears were just shadows of my imagination. Eventually, the strange gift stopped, and the black cat disappeared into the night. But even now, years later, whenever I see a teddy bear, no matter how innocent, a chill runs down my spine. The girl in the nightgown, the silent watcher in the darkness, and those haunting black eyes, they remain etched in my memory, a reminder that sometimes the darkest battles are fought within. I was about 9 years old when I first saw it. It was early morning, the kind of day when the world feels suspended between night and day, just before dawn, with a greyish mist clinging to everything. The sunlight filtered through my bedroom window, soft and muted, casting long shadows across the room. I had just woken up. The house was empty. Everyone else was already out. My bed was by the window, facing the hallway and my parents' room beyond. I lay there, unsure whether to get up or try to catch a few more minutes of sleep. Then something lurched into the doorway, a shadow darker than the darkest corner of the hall. It wasn't just a shadow cast by the walls. It was alive, writhing like a mass of stubby tendrils, restless and twisting in every direction. Its shape vaguely resembled a person, tall, about 5 feet, but jagged as if cut out roughly from black paper. The tendrils extended outward like claws, sharp and menacing. It moved with a strange lurching gait, not floating but walking upright, defying every law of logic and physics I knew. Despite having no eyes or mouth, only hollow holes where those features should be, it wore a twisted grin that chilled me to the bone. I was frozen, caught in a terrible moment between disbelief and fear. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body refused to move. It was the kind of paralysis that locks your mind and muscles in place, an invisible chain heavier than any shackle. The shadow crept closer, its head swiveling unnaturally to stare right at me. The air grew thick, the sounds of the world muffled as if trapped in a glass bubble. I thought about hiding, but the blanket over my head was a poor shield. It did nothing but block my vision from the horrible sight. Minutes passed like hours as I trembled beneath the covers, wondering if this was the moment I would die. Would it reach out and tear my flesh, or burn me with its smoky touch? But nothing happened. Eventually, the shadow faded, retreating into the darkness as silently as it had come. When I finally dared to peek out, the room was just as ordinary as it had been before, empty, quiet, and still. The aftermath of that morning was a haze of confusion and fear. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, and no one would believe me even if I tried. The shadow wasn't a figment of imagination. I felt its presence lingering, heavy and oppressive, like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. In the days that followed, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made my heart race. I slept with the bedroom door closed, clutching my blankets tight, afraid the shadow would return if I gave it the chance. I asked my parents, but they dismissed it as a bad dream, or the product of an overactive imagination. Maybe it was. But the memory remained sharp, etched in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I imagined the shadow lurking in the hallway, just beyond the light, watching and waiting. Sometimes, when the house was silent, I could almost feel it pressing against the edges of reality, neither fully there nor entirely gone. Years passed, and though I grew older, that shadow never truly left me. I never saw it again, but the feeling of being watched, the chill that crept down my spine in empty rooms, stayed with me. I never understood what it was, a ghost, a demon, or something from another dimension. Maybe it was all in my mind. But some part of me knows that the darkness we fear is often more real than we want to admit. That shadow, with its jagged edges and hollow grin, taught me that fear isn't just a feeling. It can be a presence, an entity that lingers in the spaces between light and dark. And sometimes the scariest thing is not knowing when it will come back. Being a single mother comes with its own set of challenges. The constant balancing act between providing for your child and keeping them safe. I was living alone with my toddler son in a small apartment complex at the edge of town. My job was nothing glamorous, just a full-time office gig that paid the bills and kept food on the table. Life was quiet, predictable, until the news hit like a thunderclap. Someone had escaped from the psychiatric ward at the local hospital. The authorities were on high alert, warning residents to be cautious and to report any sightings. The thought seemed straight out of a horror movie, the kind of story you'd scoff at until it becomes your reality. I recognized the man's face instantly. Someone from my high school years. Not a friend, not even an acquaintance, but a familiar figure nonetheless. He'd been a popular, athletic kid from a wealthy family. The news said he had been involuntarily committed and had somehow slipped away. Days passed, and the man remained at large. Rumors swirled that he had broken into a neighbor's house nearby, slept in their attic, and vanished before police could arrive. I dismissed the idea that he'd come near me. My apartment was 2 streets away, and I didn't know him well enough to be on his radar. But then came the night that changed everything. I was home alone with my son. After putting him to bed, I settled on the couch to watch TV. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the television. Suddenly, I heard a faint thump. The kind of noise you try to ignore because you want to believe it's nothing. A few minutes later, another thump. This time, it caught my full attention. My heart pounded as I paused the show and listened intently. The apartment was 2 stories, kitchen, dining and living room downstairs, bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. Our living room faced the back of the complex, with large glass doors opening onto a grassy yard shared by the residents. I had long, sheer white curtains covering those doors. At night, leaving them uncovered always made me uneasy. That night, a dark shadow glided slowly across the window, visible through the curtains. My rational mind told me it was probably someone walking their dog, but the complex had a strict no-pets policy. I had never seen anyone outside in that yard since moving in. My breath caught as the shadow passed again, pacing, almost deliberate. I was frozen, unsure if I was imagining things or if something truly was out there. Then the door handle rattled. My son began to cry upstairs. The rattling stopped instantly and the shadow disappeared. I pulled the curtains apart and scanned the yard. Nothing. No one. The grass lay still under the moonlight, the silence unbroken. I locked the door and hurried upstairs to comfort my son, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was out there? Was it the escaped patient or some other stranger lurking in the night? After that unsettling night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The thought that the escaped patient could be so close, lurking in the shadows just outside my home, haunted me. I bolted every door, checked every lock multiple times, and even installed an extra deadbolt on the back door. Yet, no matter what precautions I took, the sense of vulnerability lingered like a heavy fog. Days later, I tried to push the fear aside. Life demanded it. But strange things kept happening. Small, inexplicable moments that chipped away at my peace. My toddler niece started talking obsessively about wanting a teddy bear for Christmas. It was odd, because she already had plenty. But she wouldn't let it go, insisting on a teddy bear like it was some urgent need. Then, on my way to work, I passed a pile of clothes strewn across the freeway. Among the debris was a battered, dirty teddy bear. One eye missing, fur matted with grime. It seemed like a cruel coincidence, but the image stuck with me. One evening, a sticker of a teddy bear appeared on the bathroom mirror at a gas station I visited. It was odd and out of place. I tried to brush off the feeling that someone was sending a message. Then came another doorbell ring in the dead of night, this time around 3 a.m. My heart raced as I checked outside. Nothing. But when I looked down at my doorstep, there it was. A giant, tattered teddy bear sitting right against the wall, its unblinking eyes staring ahead. I froze, breath caught in my throat. It was no longer just a creepy coincidence, it was a warning, a message. I slammed the door shut, locked every bolt, and called my husband in a panic. He was just a few hundred meters away, but he had no answers. No one I knew would do this. For weeks, I lived in terror, watching every shadow, hearing every creak, and never truly feeling safe. Eventually, the teddy bears stopped appearing, and the strange events subsided. The escaped man was caught 2 hours away, readmitted under strict supervision. But the memory, that chilling feeling of being hunted, stayed with me long after the danger passed. Sometimes, when the night is still, I still imagine that shadow pacing outside my door, and I wonder how close the darkness really came. It was a scorching summer morning, the kind that made the air thick and heavy, even indoors. Our family house had always been a place of comfort, But that day, something ordinary turned into a scene from a nightmare. I was about 13, and my younger brother G was 9. My parents were bustling about, getting ready for the day, when suddenly a loud banging noise echoed from the kitchen area. At first, we thought it was just the usual clatter of a busy household, but the sound grew louder, more erratic, a screeching, rattling commotion that sent a chill down our spines. Curious and a bit alarmed, we rushed to the kitchen door that led to the outside area. What we saw made our jaws drop. The washing machine, our old reliable workhorse, was shaking violently, jumping across the floor as if possessed. It was making a terrifying racket, banging against the walls, spinning and vibrating uncontrollably. Dad chuckled nervously, trying to ease our fears. "Maybe the timer's stuck," he said, reaching for the control knob. He clicked it off and on, hoping to stop the chaos. But the machine had a mind of its own. The banging continued, shaking the entire kitchen. Dad tried the off button. Nothing. He opened the lid, which usually stopped the spin, but this time it just kept going. Mum came in, eyes wide with disbelief, and finally unplugged the machine. The moment the power cut, the shaking slowed and stopped, but only after a tense minute that felt like an eternity. We all stood there, stunned. The washing machine, without power, without anyone touching it, had come alive, a mechanical beast raging in our kitchen. From that day on, strange occurrences like this weren't rare in our house. Doors would creak open and shut on their own. Lights flickered unpredictably. Objects seemed to move or disappear only to reappear in odd places. It was as if the house had a heartbeat, a will of its own, a presence that refused to be ignored. After that terrifying morning with the washing machine, the eerie happenings in our house only escalated. It was as though the very walls whispered secrets we weren't meant to hear. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, the lights suddenly flickered wildly before plunging the room into darkness. The hum of electricity faded, leaving us in a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Mum lit candles, her hands trembling slightly, and we ate by their flickering glow, eyes darting toward every shadow. Days later, I was alone in my room studying when I heard footsteps pacing just outside my door. Expecting Dad or Mum, I called out, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped abruptly. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, eerily still. My brother G complained about toys mysteriously moving on their own, and Mum spoke of hearing whispering voices when she was alone at night. The house felt alive, but not in a comforting way. One night, I woke to the sound of soft singing drifting from the kitchen. It was a haunting melody, unfamiliar and chilling. I crept downstairs, heart pounding, but found no one there. The washing machine sat silent, innocent-looking, as if mocking my fear. Eventually, the family decided to seek help. We invited a spiritual advisor, someone who specialized in cleansing homes. After days of rituals and prayers, the atmosphere in the house lightened. The banging stopped, the shadows receded, and a fragile peace returned. Yet, even now, years later, whenever I pass by a washing machine, I can't help but shudder. That ordinary appliance, once our household workhorse, became a symbol of the inexplicable, a reminder that sometimes the things we trust most can turn against us in the darkest ways. I grew up in a small neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and doors were often left unlocked. Life was peaceful, predictable, a quiet world where the loudest sounds were the rustling leaves and distant laughter. Yet, beneath that calm surface, subtle disturbances began to weave their way into my daily life, unraveling the sense of security I once took for granted. It all started with a faint sound at the front gate. One afternoon, as I was inside the house, I heard the unmistakable clinking and shifting of a padlock being tampered with. My first thought was that it must be my mother returning from the supermarket. She usually came home around that time. I rushed to open the front door, but what I saw stopped me cold. My mother was standing outside, struggling to open the gate, and my younger brother was standing next to her. Both were locked out. Confused, I asked my mother when she had left the house. She said she had just stepped out moments ago, while my brother insisted he had been inside all the time. My head spun as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How could the gate have locked itself with both of them outside? Was someone else inside? Had the locks been tampered with? A chill ran down my spine as unease settled in. That moment shattered the invisible shield of safety I had believed our home possessed. From that day forward, strange occurrences began piling up. I frequently heard my name whispered in the empty house, soft and barely audible, as if called by a presence unseen. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond the edge of my vision, vanishing whenever I looked directly at them. The hallway near my bedroom felt different, colder and darker than the rest of the house. The artificial lights never quite penetrated the gloom at its far end. I found myself glancing anxiously toward the dark corridor, sensing unseen eyes watching me from the shadows. In my mind, an image took shape. A woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her long black hair obscuring her face, standing silently at the end of the hallway, watching. I don't know why my imagination fixed on that figure, but she became the embodiment of the presence I felt, a silent sentinel haunting the house's deepest shadows. The feeling of being observed intensified, spilling over into my dreams. I often woke in the dead of night with a heavy pressure on my chest, as if the weight of those unseen eyes was pressing down on me. The sensation of breath on my neck and the sense of an unblinking gaze became nightly tormentors. One night, while lying awake in bed, I heard soft footsteps pacing outside my door. I called out, but the only response was silence. The footsteps stopped abruptly, then faded away into nothingness. My once safe and comforting home had become a stage for unseen actors, invisible yet palpable. My mother grew quieter, more hesitant to be alone after dark. My brother refused to sleep in his own room, clinging to the safety of shared spaces. And I, too, found myself locking doors multiple times before finally drifting into uneasy sleep. Then, one night I saw her. The woman in white stood at the end of the hallway, her face hidden behind a curtain of jet black hair. I froze, unable to speak or move. She didn't approach, only watched, a silent presence in the depths of the darkness. Over time, I realized this presence wasn't hostile or vengeful. Instead, she was patient, sorrowful, waiting. The house held her story, her grief woven into its very fabric. Despite my fear, a strange connection grew between us, as if she was waiting for something or someone. I searched for answers but found none. She remained a mystery, a shadow from the past whose story was lost to time. Years later, I still feel her watching whenever I'm alone. Sometimes when I glance down a dark hallway, I imagine those hollow eyes staring back. She is a reminder that some stories never end, some shadows never fade. And sometimes, the most terrifying ghosts are those who simply wait silently in the dark. The days and nights that followed were filled with a quiet, creeping dread that settled into the very air of our home. The woman in white, though silent and still, became a presence I could neither ignore nor fully understand. Her constant watching felt like a weight pressing down on every step I took. The hallway that once seemed just a simple passage transformed into a threshold between worlds, between the familiar and the unknown. Each time I walked its length, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my heartbeat quickened. I would find myself stealing glances down that dark corridor, half expecting to see her waiting there, as if time itself had paused for her presence. My family tried to maintain normalcy. My mother busied herself with daily chores, trying to ignore the shadows that haunted her steps. My younger brother, ever innocent and curious, seemed oblivious, but often asked questions that lingered in the air like forgotten whispers. Why did the lights flicker? Why did doors creak in the middle of the night? Why did the house sometimes feel colder than it should? One particularly chilling night, I awoke to the sound of soft singing, an eerie, haunting melody drifting from somewhere deep within the house. The voice was clear yet distant, carrying a sorrow I could not place. Drawn by the sound, I followed it through the dimly lit hallways, my heart pounding louder with every step. The singing stopped abruptly as I reached the end of the corridor. The air was thick, heavy, and still. I stood alone in the silence, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The shadows shifted, and for a moment I thought I saw her silhouette, slender, draped in white, hair cascading like a waterfall of darkness. Terrified yet compelled, I reached out as if to touch the apparition, but my hand met only cold air. The figure faded into nothingness, leaving behind a lingering chill that seeped into my bones. Days turned into weeks, and the experiences continued. Lights flickered inexplicably, objects moved without cause, and the sensation of being watched never left me. My family grew wary, whispering about the presence that had settled into our home. Seeking relief, we turned to those who understood the unseen, spiritual advisors who came to bless and cleanse our house. Rituals were performed, prayers were said, candles burned into the night. Slowly, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, shadows receded, and the eerie presence became less tangible. Yet, even as peace returned, I knew she had not truly left. The woman in white remained a part of our story, a silent witness to the past, a guardian of memories too painful to forget. Years later, when I walk alone through dark corridors or feel a sudden chill in a warm room, I remember her watching eyes and the whispered melody that once filled our home. Some presences do not scream or rage. They wait patiently, haunting the spaces between light and shadow, forever part of the fabric of the places they once called home. And sometimes the most profound hauntings are not about fear, but about remembrance, about stories told in silence and the shadows that refuse to fade. Living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a bustling city should have felt liberating, even empowering. I was independent, used to my own company, and comfortable in my routines. Yet in the weeks leading up to Christmas, an unshakable feeling of dread began to settle over me, wrapping itself tightly around my every step. It started subtly, with nightmares that clawed their way into my sleep, episodes of sleep paralysis that I had battled since my teenage years. In those moments, my body lay frozen, caught between wakefulness and slumber as shadowy figures loomed over me. One particular vision stayed with me. A young girl, no older than 10, in a white nightgown, standing silently at the foot of my bed. hollow black eyes staring without blinking. She clutched a small teddy bear, motionless, her presence a cold, oppressive weight in the darkness. Though I could eventually force myself awake, the terror lingered long after the episodes ended, haunting the edges of my consciousness during waking hours. Then came the black cat. It appeared on my nightly walks with my aging dog, always in the shadows, always watching. The cat was ordinary, yet its presence felt anything but. It followed us silently through the streets, its unblinking eyes locking onto me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a harbinger, a silent sentinel of something darker lurking just beyond the veil of normalcy. One night, the doorbell rang at nearly 3 a.m., jolting me awake. I checked the peephole and windows. Nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than the ringing itself, suffocating in its emptiness. Then, on my doorstep, I found it. A giant, worn teddy bear sitting upright against the wall, its eyes staring blankly into the night. Its fur was matted and stained, a red bow tied neatly around its neck, adding a sinister formality to the grotesque presence. Panic surged through me. Who would leave such a thing? Was it a message? A warning? I slammed the door shut, locked every bolt, and called my husband, my voice trembling. He was nearby, but had no explanation. For weeks I lived in terror, haunted by shadows, disturbed by silence, stalked by the cat, and haunted by the ever-present teddy bears appearing in unexpected places. As days passed, the strange occurrences escalated. I would wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, convinced I heard footsteps outside my door or whispers just beyond my bedroom walls. The black cat became a constant companion on my nighttime walks, its eyes glowing eerily in the dark, always watching, always silent. One evening, while grocery shopping for last-minute Christmas preparations, I found myself struggling to open my car's hatchback with my hands full. A man nearby offered help. He was rough around the edges, dirty clothes, unkempt hair, but his intense blue eyes seemed to pierce right through me. I declined, wary of strangers, but he insisted, opening the door for me without permission. Before I could react, he handed me a small Christmas teddy bear, complete with a Santa hat. I was stunned, unsure whether to accept the gift or flee. The man smiled knowingly, as if aware of my fear. I refused, climbed into my car, and drove away quickly, glancing nervously in the rear-view mirror as his expression darkened. That night, the teddy bears stopped appearing. The oppressive silence lifted gradually. My husband reassured me that the man was no longer nearby and that I was safe. Yet the memory of those weeks remained etched in my mind, a chilling reminder that darkness can lurk even in the brightest times. Though the terror has faded, teddy bears now evoke a strange unease in me. The image of the silent girl in the nightgown, the unblinking black eyes, and the stalking cat linger like ghosts of a past I cannot forget. Sometimes, when the night is still and the world feels fragile, I wonder what other shadows walk just beyond the edges of sight, waiting, watching, and silently haunting the lives of those who dare to be alone. It began as a simple weekend getaway, a chance to escape the monotony of city life, to breathe fresh air and find solace in nature. My friends and I planned a hiking trip to a remote forest known locally as the Whispering Woods, a place shrouded in myths and legends, yet alluring in its untouched beauty. The forest was said to be ancient, with towering trees that had stood for centuries. Villagers nearby told tales of strange sounds carried by the wind, whispers that seemed to call out to lost travelers. Some said the woods were haunted by spirits who guarded secrets long buried beneath the roots. We laughed off the stories, eager to explore. Equipped with backpacks, maps and camping gear, we set out early Saturday morning, the sun casting golden rays over the dew-kissed fields as we approached the forest's edge. The air grew cooler as we entered the dense canopy. Birdsong filled the silence, mingling with the soft crunch of leaves beneath our boots. Everything felt vibrant and alive until we noticed something unusual. The forest was strangely quiet beyond the birds. No rustling of small animals, no buzzing insects. It was as if the woods held their breath, watching us. We pressed on, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the trees. After hours of hiking, we reached a clearing bathed in pale sunlight. There, an old stone altar stood, covered in moss and vines. Symbols carved into its surface hinted at rituals long forgotten. Curiosity drew us closer. Suddenly, a soft murmur drifted through the clearing, barely audible, like the wind weaving voices into the leaves. At first, we thought it was the breeze, but the whispering grew clearer, forming words just beyond comprehension. A chill ran down my spine. The air thickened, heavy with something unseen. As twilight fell, we set up camp near the altar, the forest darkening around us like a closing curtain. Shadows lengthened and the whispers returned, weaving through the trees in haunting patterns. Sleep eluded me. The whispers seemed to seep into my dreams, tugging at memories I didn't know I had. Faces appeared at the edge of vision, eyes shining with ancient knowledge and sorrow. When dawn broke, we decided to explore further, unaware that our journey had only just begun, and that the whispering woods held secrets that would challenge everything we believed about reality. As the first light of dawn filtered through the thick canopy, we packed up our camp with a mixture of excitement and unease. The previous night's whispers haunted our thoughts, vague words slipping through the rustling leaves, shadows that seemed to linger just beyond our sight. None of us spoke much as we ventured deeper into the forest, each step carrying us further into the unknown. The path twisted and turned, growing narrower and less distinct. The towering trees seemed to close in around us, their gnarled roots weaving like ancient serpents beneath the mossy floor. A heavy silence settled. No bird song, no insects, only the soft crunch of our footsteps and the occasional sigh of the wind. Then, almost imperceptibly, the whispers returned. This time clearer, like voices carried on the breeze. We strained to listen. "Leave, not safe. The forest watches." The words came fragmented, overlapping in a haunting chorus. Unease settled like a stone in my chest. We pressed on, but the forest's atmosphere thickened as if warning us to turn back. Suddenly, ahead, a faint glow emanated through the trees, a clearing bathed in ethereal light. As we stepped into it, time seemed to slow. At the center stood an ancient tree, wider than any we'd seen, its bark etched with symbols glowing faintly. Drawn by a force beyond reason, I reached out to touch the bark. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, a shock ran through me. Visions flashed. Faces of people long gone, events from a forgotten past, emotions raw and alive. A voice, clear and resonant, echoed in my mind. "Guardian of the woods, seeker of truth, are you ready to see?" My heart pounded. The forest's secrets were no longer distant myths. They were entwined with my very being. The others gathered around, eyes wide with awe and fear. We realized the forest was alive in ways we had never imagined, a place where past and present intertwined. The sun climbed higher, yet the clearing remained suspended in a timeless glow. We knew our journey was only beginning, and that the Whispering Woods held truths that could change everything. The city never truly slept, but there was something about the midnight train station that felt eerily deserted, as if the world had momentarily paused its breath. I worked late nights as a graphic designer, often catching the last train home after long hours at the office. The station was my familiar haunt, cold, dimly lit, echoing with distant announcements and the occasional clatter of approaching trains. One Friday night, exhausted and drained, I arrived at the platform just minutes before the last train was scheduled to depart. The usually bustling station was nearly empty, save for a few scattered passengers huddled against the biting cold. I found a bench near the far end of the platform and settled in, headphones on, music drowning out the silence. As I waited, my eyes drifted to the flickering lights overhead and the peeling posters plastered on the walls, reminders of a city both vibrant and decaying. The train arrived with a screech and a hiss, doors sliding open to welcome the few late passengers. I boarded and found a seat near the window, the cold metal of the train contrasting with the warmth of the heated cabin. As the train pulled away from the station, the city lights blurred into streaks of color. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting fatigue wash over me. When I opened them again, something caught my attention. A figure standing on the platform, watching the train disappear into the night. He was tall, dressed in a long dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. Something about his presence unsettled me, but I shrugged it off as exhaustion playing tricks. Minutes later, the train slowed and stopped at the next station. The doors hissed open, but no one boarded or left. The station was empty, except for a woman standing alone near the edge of the platform. Her appearance was ghostly, pale skin illuminated by the flickering lights, long dark hair draped over a white dress. She didn't move, just stared silently at the passing train, her eyes empty yet haunting. A chill ran down my spine. I looked away quickly, convincing myself it was a trick of the light. As the train resumed its journey, strange things began to happen. The overhead lights flickered erratically. The temperature dropped sharply. I could hear whispers, soft, indistinct voices weaving through the hum of the train. I tried to focus on the music, but the whispers grew louder, almost pleading. Suddenly the train jolted to a halt in the middle of the tunnel, lights plunging into darkness. Panic rippled through the cabin as passengers murmured anxiously. In the brief glow of emergency lights, I caught sight of shadowy figures moving just outside the windows. Silhouettes that didn't belong to any living soul. Heart pounding, I gripped the armrest, questioning whether I was awake or trapped in a nightmare. The emergency lights cast eerie, flickering shadows across the faces of the passengers. Murmurs turned into whispers of fear. No one dared move, and the cold silence inside the train was broken only by the soft tapping of rain against the windows and the occasional creak of the metal frame. Through the darkened windows, I saw them, figures emerging from the tunnel walls, translucent and shifting, like smoke caught in a draught. Their faces were indistinct, but their eyes glowed faintly with a sickly green light. They didn't walk. They floated, drifting alongside the train as if tethered to it by invisible chains. The woman in white reappeared on the platform outside, standing motionless, her eyes locked on me. I felt an unbearable chill radiate from her, a sorrow deeper than the darkest night. Her lips parted, and a voice echoed inside my mind, soft, pleading. "Help us! Free us!" Suddenly the train jolted again, and the lights returned. Passengers blinked, unsure if what they'd seen was real or hallucination. The train resumed its motion, slower now, as if the shadows weighed heavily on its progress. I found myself unable to look away from the woman's face, etched with sadness and desperation. I knew then that this was no ordinary ghost story, but a tether to something ancient and tragic. In the following days, I couldn't shake the encounter. Dreams haunted me. Visions of lost souls trapped between worlds, wandering the tunnels, searching for release. The whispering voices lingered in my ears, calling out from the darkness. Driven by a need to understand, I began researching the history of the subway system. I uncovered tales of accidents, disappearances, and unexplained phenomena dating back decades. Old newspaper clippings spoke of construction workers who vanished without a trace, of trains derailed with no survivors, and of shadows seen beneath the earth. One story stood out, the legend of a tragic fire that consumed a section of the tunnel, trapping dozens of workers. Their bodies were never recovered, and locals believed their spirits remained bound to the rails. Determined to find closure, I reached out to a paranormal investigator known for exploring urban legends. Together we planned a journey into the heart of the tunnels. As we descended into the underground darkness, the air grew thick with anticipation and dread. Every step echoed in the silent expanse, and the temperature dropped sharply. Suddenly whispers surrounded us, soft, sorrowful, pleading. Shadows flickered in the corners of our vision, and the woman in white appeared again, guiding us toward the forgotten passage. In that forgotten tunnel, we found remnants of the past, rusted tools, charred timbers, and faded photographs. The spirits of the lost workers seemed to stir, reaching out through the veil, yearning to be remembered. We performed a ritual of remembrance and release, honoring the souls trapped for decades. As we emerged into the daylight, the oppressive weight lifted. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. The last train home no longer felt haunted, but forever marked by the memory of those who waited in the shadows. When my parents decided to buy an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, I was filled with excitement and curiosity. The house was a sprawling, creaky structure with tall ceilings, ornate woodwork, and an aura of faded grandeur. It stood on a quiet street lined with towering oak trees, their branches casting long shadows that danced in the afternoon light. From the moment we moved in, I felt that the house held stories, whispers of lives long past, secrets hidden in its walls. My room was at the front of the house, overlooking the street, and I spent hours exploring every nook and cranny, fascinated by the antique fixtures and dusty portraits that adorned the halls. One rainy afternoon, while rummaging through the attic, I stumbled upon a small, intricately crafted dollhouse tucked away in a corner. It was a miniature replica of our very own house, down to the smallest detail. The winding staircase, the ornate fireplace, even the faded wallpaper in my bedroom. Curious, I brought the dollhouse downstairs and placed it on the living room table. As I examined it, I noticed something strange. The furniture inside seemed oddly arranged, different from our actual rooms. A chair was overturned, a door slightly ajar in the miniature parlor. That night, as the rain pattered against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dollhouse was more than a mere toy. I kept glancing at it from my bed, the miniature windows glowing faintly in the dark. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Objects in the house would be out of place, books shifted on shelves, doors left open that I was sure I had closed. I would hear soft footsteps creaking across the old wooden floorboards when no one was home. One evening, as I sat near the dollhouse, I noticed movement inside it, a tiny flicker as if a miniature figure had shifted position. My heart raced. I leaned closer, but the room was empty. Later that night I was awakened by whispers, soft voices calling my name from beneath the floorboards. I got out of bed and followed the sound to the living room, where the old floorboards creaked ominously. Kneeling down, I felt a cold draft emanating from beneath the wood. The house held secrets, secrets buried deep, waiting to be uncovered. That night, sleep abandoned me. The whispers continued, weaving through the dark like ghostly threads, pulling me toward the floorboards. Unable to resist, I fetched a crowbar and pried up the creaking wood, revealing a narrow, dust-choked cavity beneath. Inside lay an old wooden box, intricately carved and coated in decades of grime. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside, I found faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a small, delicate porcelain doll, its face cracked, but eyes eerily lifelike. The photographs depicted a family from long ago, parents and children whose faces seemed familiar in an unexplainable way. Among the letters was a diary belonging to a young girl named Eleanor, who once lived in the house. Reading her words, I discovered a tragic tale of love, loss, and dark secrets. Eleanor wrote of strange happenings in the house, the sounds beneath the floor, the shadows that moved on their own, and a mysterious dollhouse that seemed to control the very fate of her family. As I delved deeper into Eleanor's diary, I realized the dollhouse in our living room was not just a replica. It was a conduit, a bridge between the past and present. The miniature disturbances mirrored the real events unfolding in the house. Determined to uncover the truth, I sought out local historians and neighbors, piecing together Eleanor's story. She had vanished mysteriously one stormy night, leaving behind whispers that haunted the house to this day. One evening, as a fierce thunderstorm raged outside, I sat before the dollhouse, the diary in my lap. Suddenly, the miniature door swung open, revealing a tiny figure stepping out, Eleanor herself, translucent and shimmering. Frozen in awe and fear, I watched as the doll's lips moved, whispering a plea for help. The secrets beneath the floorboards were not just memories, they were a call to set her free. With newfound resolve, I prepared to confront the shadows of the past, knowing that the forgotten dollhouse held the key to breaking the curse that bound Eleanor and the house itself. It started with a simple phone call, a number I didn't recognize flashing on my screen late one night. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity won over fatigue. The line was silent at first, a deep, unbroken quiet that stretched on longer than felt natural. "Hello?" I whispered, but no response came. The call ended abruptly. I checked the number, unlisted, no details anywhere. That was the beginning of the calls, silent, late at night, always from unknown numbers. They came in waves, sometimes one a night, sometimes several, never more, never less. I told myself it was a prank or a glitch. But the calls grew more unsettling. Sometimes, amidst the silence, I heard faint whispers, words I couldn't make out, but the tone was urgent, pleading. Sleep became difficult. Every time the phone rang, my heart lurched. I stopped answering altogether, but the calls kept coming, even when the phone was off. One night, in a fit of desperation, I traced the number. It led to an old abandoned house on the edge of town, a place rumored to be haunted, left empty for decades. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, I decided to visit the house, hoping to find answers. The house was a crumbling relic, its windows boarded and walls covered in peeling paint. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creaking floorboards beneath my feet. In the basement, I found an old rotary phone, dusty and disconnected from any line. Yet it was eerily familiar, the same number that had been calling me. Suddenly, the phone rang. I picked up, and this time, a voice whispered my name. As I held the receiver to my ear, the whisper grew clearer, chilling me to the bone. It was my name, spoken softly, almost lovingly, yet filled with an unexplainable sorrow. "Help me," the voice pleaded, fading in and out like a fragile breath. A sudden cold swept through the basement, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. The phone's rotary dial began to spin on its own, the clicks echoing through the empty room. I dropped the receiver in shock, but the phone continued ringing. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. Gathering my courage, I reached for the phone again. This time, the voice was clearer, telling me fragments of a story, a tale of betrayal, loss, and a life cut short within those very walls. The spirit trapped in the house was desperate to be heard, to find justice, to finally rest. Days turned into nights filled with unease. The calls followed me home, the whispers now part of my waking thoughts. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the haunted number and the forgotten soul reaching out. With the help of old town records and the local library, I uncovered the tragic history of the house. Years ago, a young woman named Margaret lived there. She was betrayed by someone she trusted and met a violent end, her cries for help forever etched in the walls. Determined to set her free, I returned to the house one last time. Performing a ritual of remembrance, I spoke her name aloud, promising to tell her story so she would no longer be forgotten. The phone rang once more, but this time when I answered, there was only silence. A peaceful, comforting silence. As I left the house, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. The echoes from the phone line had finally faded, leaving behind a story told and a soul at rest. It was a chilly autumn evening when I first noticed something strange in the mirror of my childhood home. The house had been empty for years, passed down from my grandparents to my parents, and finally to me. Returning to sort through old belongings felt like stepping into a museum of memories. Dusty photographs, faded letters, and the lingering scent of time. I was in my grandmother's bedroom when I caught sight of it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, moving just behind me in the mirror's reflection. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded as I stared back into the mirror, where the shadow lingered, barely visible yet undeniably there. At first I chalked it up to fatigue or tricks of the light, but over the following days the shadow became more persistent. It appeared at odd times, sometimes when no one else was home. The mirror seemed to hold a window into another world, one where the past and present blurred. Late one night, as a storm raged outside, I found myself drawn to the mirror again. This time the shadow took shape, a figure draped in old-fashioned clothing, eyes filled with sorrow and longing. It beckoned silently, urging me to listen. Compelled beyond reason, I began to uncover the house's hidden history. Stories of loss, betrayal, and secrets buried beneath generations of silence. The mirror was a gateway, reflecting not just my own image, but the echoes of those who had lived and died within these walls. As the storm's thunder rumbled through the night, I stood transfixed before the mirror, the shadowy figure's gaze locked onto mine. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with a palpable sadness that seeped from the glass itself. Without words, the figure began to reveal fragments of a story, visions flickering in my mind like old film reels. I saw a young woman named Eleanor, dressed in Victorian attire, trapped in a loveless marriage, her spirit confined within the house's walls. Her sorrow and desperation echoed through time, seeking release. Each night thereafter, the mirror became a portal to Eleanor's past. She showed me memories of laughter and heartbreak, whispered secrets of betrayal and lost love. I felt her pain as if it were my own, her silent plea for freedom burning deep within me. Determined to help, I researched Eleanor's life, uncovering a tragic tale of betrayal by those she trusted most. Her untimely death had left her spirit restless, bound to the mirror that reflected not just faces, but souls. With guidance from a local historian and spiritual advisor, I performed a ritual to honor Eleanor's memory and release her spirit. As I completed the final incantation, the mirror shimmered and the shadow dissolved into a warm, gentle light. The house seemed to breathe anew, the heavy sorrow lifting like a veil. Peace settled in the room, and I felt a profound connection to the past and those who came before. The mirror now reflected only my own face, unburdened by shadows. But I knew the echoes of the past would always linger, a testament to the lives intertwined within the walls